Hey, everybody, I'm Dan Benkin with the Never Go Against the Family podcast here at the UNI Family Business Center. Today, I'm joined by Ann Smart, who's a lead consultant with Gen 6 in Chicago. But prior to that, she was a longtime executive director for the Loyola Family Business Center, which, if you're familiar with family business centers, you know they're kind of at the pinnacle of that grouping. And so we're really appreciative to have Ann on with us, share a little bit about her experiences working with family-owned companies, and talking a little bit today. I think, Ann, we'll try to touch on the concepts around family dynamics, the softer side of succession planning a little bit, I guess, and your thoughts on that. And you've worked with hundreds of companies over the years, and so maybe you have some thoughts on where you see them go wrong with family dynamics. Maybe we could start right there, just get into it.
Sure. Dan, thanks so much for having me. I love the work you're doing at your center, and I'm going to just do a shout out to everyone who listens to this to think about your upcoming conference. So as a former director, I'm very aware of how important it is to have that peer-to-peer experience. But you want to talk about family dynamics, and it's funny, at Gen 6, we're always talking about structure is not the first solution to the problem. Instead, we need to look at the family and the dynamics. What we're always looking to do is to build family capacity,
Okay.
so that there can be sustainability for the business and sustainability for the family.
How do you kind of define that capacity? What do you mean by that?
Sure. Well, you go to business school, you learn how to operate a business, but nobody goes to family school really, unless they go into therapy or they study it at the
Yep.
university, to learn how to be a high-performing family, a family that knows how to communicate, a family that knows how to listen, and a family that can understand the boundaries between family and the business and ownership and governance. So these things don't come naturally to us. And, people go into business together. They don't pick their partners. Their
Right.
partners are family members. So the things that actually contribute to a high performing, growing business don't necessarily also contribute to a high performing, healthy family.
It's a great point. Absolutely. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of some examples in my head. I don't want to go through them here, but you're absolutely right. And so, how do you then work with families to try to build that capacity for the softer side? How would you suggest families do that, or how should they be working with a third party, probably a lot of times, to do that?
Well, I mean, being curious and taking a mindset of that I don't know everything. And there are places I can go that are safe where I can learn these things.
Yeah.
Often what happens, whether you're working at the center level at a university or you're working at the consulting level, or even if you're working inside the business as a non-family executive or a board member who's interacting with the family, you're witness to things that you think, boy, if they knew better, they might be able to do better.
Yeah.
So the benefit of a peer relationship, like often like, the CEOs or the presidents have peer groups, whether it's Vistage or YPO or
Yeah.
something like that. So they have a peer-to-peer network where they can share confidentially what is happening, but the rest of the family typically does not have that. So where are they supposed to learn these skills?
Yeah.
So, the idea of what often happens is the person who's kind of the canary in the coal mine, or the person in the most pain, or the one who's most aware, whatever, asks for help. And when we work with people, when I work with people, there's a lot of inquiry and curiosity about, what exactly does success look like for you? What
Mm.
is we're first doing an assessment about what that family member thinks is the problem. And more often than not, it is not what it appears on the surface.
Yeah.
um, I, I mean,
Sure. The next
I
gens are
think the
saying,
question, yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, the next gens are saying, mom and dad don't trust me, or, that's their big beef or something. Or, and mom and dad are saying they don't seem interested, or they don't seem like they really want to take the reins of this thing, right? And like you said, the 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 manifestations of issues really aren't the issues at root themselves. They're much different than that, need to be tackled differently, I guess. So,
Well, and
uh,
everyone has a different point of view, and it's
yeah,
really difficult in a family to allow each person's point of view to be aired in a way that is um, positive and helpful. Because people are so defended, we fall into these patterns, right, that we grew up in, and then you have the overlap of all these different domains where we're operating.
yep,
So the opportunity really, when we work with families, is to sit down with them individually and together and really build towards something that is more positive instead of looking at what's wrong. Let's look at
okay,
what, let's identify where we're aligned.
yeah,
And then in areas where there's misalignment, what is the source of that? And sometimes it's people want the same thing. They just don't know how to get there together. So, I mean, there's so many ways to build capacity, but it does start with listening, conversation, trust building activities, an acceptance that the family is an asset that needs to be and can be invested in, that actually can support, it supports the business, as opposed to, having a business that we're trying to protect from the family.
yeah.
It's a different perspective.
Oh, yeah. Oftentimes there's one or two family members that are are doing that, trying to be a gatekeeper to keep the family out potentially, right? And that kind of thing. I like I like how you're mentioning this building capacity can start through communication, through trust building. Are there ways that you would suggest families begin that process, or what might a do-it-yourself model look like for them as a family if they know that they're a little clunky when it comes to communication? Where do they start to avoid it becoming a Jerry Springer episode?
Well, we know that, well, okay, first of all, we never go into anything without doing footwork and groundwork and planning beforehand, right? Because um, people, I don't care if you're a family or not a family, when you bring people together, especially post COVID, there's a level of anxiety that
Okay.
everybody feels. And if you acknowledge that, everyone's a little nervous about coming together. And this is in families that, have high trust and families that don't. So, baby steps and, you know, embarking on activities that have a family meeting is a great thing to start with, for example, but there's pre-work that needs to happen. And we like to work with the family members that have a great deal of credibility across the family. And it's
Okay.
not always the CEO, although that could be a person that has the most credibility in some ways. But there's a lot of talent in your family.
Yep.
And once you remove the lens of everything has to be done by the leader of the business and start thinking about more broadly about all the talent you have in your family, you can start to build a task force of people who can take in the views of the entire family about what would a good family meeting look like? What would happen during that family meeting?
Okay.
What are the traditions that, we always celebrate? Maybe we're going to learn a little bit about the business at this family meeting. Those who are working in the business all the time know everything about it. The people that are either emotional shareholders or will be shareholders or are shareholders not working in the business, they're often not as informed. Taking an opportunity to build some pride and identity, right,
Yeah.
with the business. I have a colleague who always talks about how much fun it is to give people access to the swag closet. When you see the 7-year-old marching around with the hat on with the logo and they're so excited about that, that is very powerful, that sense of belonging.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I love your point about the family meeting not having to be run by the assuming that it's family, the CEO, type of thing, and that others can step into that role, or maybe a group of others can step into that role to plan those meetings, to circulate agendas and facilitate those kinds of things without it always having to be the founder or the current CEO type of thing. And as maybe they don't have those skill sets as well as others might. I
Well,
love
and
it.
let's be frank, they're busy, right? They have a lot of
That's
things
true
to do.
too.
So, a shared sense of purpose about what does it mean to be part of this family business doesn't come from the CEO telling you what it is. It comes from the whole family coming together and discerning what their values are, putting those into action. What does it mean to own a business together? What is our responsibility?
Yeah.
Uh, One another. How do we want to interact? And this isn't a one and done, right? I mean, it's a kind of an evolutionary process. It takes effort, thought, concentration, investment, and belief that the family is the asset that can be operationalized and deployed for the benefit of the family and the business.
Okay. That's a great take. I never heard that before. But that the family is the asset, not necessarily the business, not
Well,
necessarily.
and let's say
Okay.
and.
Okay. And but don't forget the family there is maybe part of it too,
Right.
right?
Right.
Is that we're bringing something to the table as a family as well. Um, oh, that's a great point. Okay. And so then, maybe if I have you go a little further on this communications piece of things, I think that's an area that a lot of families struggle with is that they, usually only communicate out of, as you very well put it earlier, about our defensive natures as human beings. A lot of times our communication is done from that point of view or that place, I guess, of and how do you see families do it better than that, or how do they take the time to do it differently than just when there's a rub going on?
So there's a couple of things. One, you have to work with the willing.
Okay, great,
Um,
great point.
and what I believe is most families that ask for help are willing. And then developing some objectivity and normalizing the experience, right? Like whatever a family is going through, another family has been through it beforehand and
Yeah,
has made it out the other side with help. Uh, so there's that. So like coming up beside a family that's asked for help, we do sort of an assessment about what their skills and capacity actually are
hmm,
currently. And one of the things that's super helpful is to help them recognize generational patterns um, around communication.
okay,
For example, when you look at somebody's genogram, and if they're willing and open to sort of giving you a family history,
yeah,
if the only way people separated from the company was through cutoff in the 3 prior generations, you don't have any model
right,
for allowing someone to step away from the business and remain in the family. So, that's an awareness, to use an example.
yeah,
Um,
and probably something that happens more often than not, and the families aren't even cognizant of it, I suppose.
right. I mean, are any of us? I
Sure,
always say like, one of the more powerful tools really for yourself and your family is to do a genogram. And then if you are safe to do so, walk through it with them, maybe with somebody else, depending on what the nature of the current level of trust is in the family. But
sure,
it's just knowledge that is helpful.
yep,
Uh, Back to if you knew better, you might do better. And looking at, what was and saying, well, I've never gotten a different way of doing this before. How might I approach this? So then, you match that with some curiosity. And then the other thing I think is always important is who's in
Okay.
on the work. It's lovely to have everybody be all in, but that's sometimes not the case. Sometimes you get a small group of willing people who are willing to do work that helps build credibility in the process.
And hopefully then attracts those that weren't willing before,
Yeah,
potentially. I've been writing down a lot of your nuggets here. Work with the willing was one you mentioned earlier. I love that one too. So, um, basically, part of your point that I'm taking away is it's okay if your family's got 14 shareholders and only two or three of them seem to be caring and willing and interested enough in these types of topics to work on it. That's a place to start, right? It's not like we should just scrap that and forget about it, but maybe we could work from that and grow that. Is that something you see
yeah,
other families do?
absolutely. And then the other thing that is harder, especially like in that first to second, second to third generation transition, is the necessity of professionalizing, or formalizing is probably a better way to put it, the means of our communication with one another. We can no longer just depend on all meeting up at work and having the conversation, or, mom does Thanksgiving dinner and we're all going to whatever, communicate about whatever at that point.
Yeah,
We're going to plan Christmas around people's schedules, all those things that are the sort of nature of planning out family work. Has to have to go into a more formal mode, and it feels weird, right? But
it,
the long-term goal there is clarity and openness.
I agree. I like you mentioning this too, because it probably does feel weird when it's just mom or dad and their kids in the business and they're all in the business. I think that's a very easy recipe for most communication to happen for the most part, right? But that isn't, for the most part, that's not every family business for sure. And eventually it gets to these different households that are in the business that didn't grow
Right.
up together, cousins, non-active family members. How are we keeping them in the loop so that they don't, make assumptions that then turn into problems, right? Or become
Mhm.
a thorn in our side type of thing. I think that's great. I mean,
Well,
formalizing that communication is not easy.
the concept that my colleague Claudia Astrakhan talks an awful lot about is fit, family
Okay.
fit. So there isn't, here's 10 steps to successful succession. You might touch all 10 of those in your process of succession, but structure cannot solve the problems that are inherent, or the challenges, because it's not always a problem. It just could be a developmental milestone, if you will, that are inherent in the family and the family dynamics. Structure alone doesn't do it. So we have to look at what the family is ready for and what
Mm-hmm.
they need. And it's not going to be a one-stop solution, and it's not forever. Families develop just like
The
individuals do, in the
business.
sense
Yeah.
that over time. And
Yep.
and alignment around what we can do now and maybe what we want to do later, and we build
Exhibit.
on our success.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. I mean, you can read many of these books and get, 8 or 10 quickly identified best practices of what families should have in place from a structure standpoint, right? And and think that, well, if we put those together, we'll be good and we'll have harmony. And that, the point you're making here is that that's absolutely not the case. And these
Well, it'd
family
be great
dynamics.
if it worked.
What's
I mean,
that?
it'd be great if it worked. I
Yeah.
mean, at Loyola, I had a whole wall of books on, and from wonderful authors, right, who were practiced at what they did. And if people could just read them and apply it, it would be awesome.
Yeah.
But that's not the way it works.
Right.
Although people get really good ideas from good books, and we learn over time, then we apply. Uh, you know,
Yeah.
we have to orient ourselves, and then the OODA loop that Torsten Pieper always talks about, which is, we orient, decide, act, and then observe, orient, decide, and act, and then observe again. So it's an iterative process that goes over and over. And when we apply it to the work we're doing with families, it kind of takes people off the hook about there's one solution and we're done.
Yeah.
Families are never done.
We'll get this family employment policy in place and we'll be good to go type of thing. Yeah.
Oh, I wish
That's
that was
great.
true.
Well, let's end with this then. You just mentioned that you're pretty well read in this subject and do writing too in this area. But can you give our listeners a book that you think has been dynamite for families you've worked with over the years that you'd really like to see others plug into?
Well, okay, I can't just give you one.
No, that's fair.
For every audience, right? There's a different book. I think next gen should read Myths and Mortals by Andrew Kite.
Okay.
It's a beautiful treatment of 18 different interviews of very successful next gens. Many names you'll recognize, and their individual challenges that when you finish the book, you realize they all had the same challenge. They all had the same sort of hero's journey they had to walk through.
Okay.
And for a next gen, I think in particular, it's very helpful. And then what I would say is a now gen, somebody who's currently leading the company who may have been a next gen at one time, it might bring them back in touch with some of the struggles that they had.
Okay.
And help them be a little more maybe aware and compassionate of how they interact with their
Sure.
next gen.
Their kids.
So that's one. I do like, I do like Strategic Planning for the Family Business as kind of a primer. And that's by Randy Carlock and John Ward, the pioneer.
Okay.
Author. And that's sort of it's a workman-like framework for strategy and aligning family strategy with business strategy, which is really important. So I think that's a very accessible book. Family Business on the Couch by Ketz DeVries, which again, very accessible and helpful. One thing I want to say, because we're talking about family dynamics, and I really want to make sure that people hear this message. It's not all about dysfunction. There are so many resilient families out there with amazing skills. There are people doing beautiful work as a family and beautiful work in their businesses that are making a tremendous impact on their communities. And we don't read about those families,
Right.
because they're not going to be on the front page of the New York Times because they're not fighting.
And they don't create drama TV stories or movies about those types of families either. Absolutely.
So, instead of thinking about what is wrong, we often talk about what is right and mapping all of the things that happened in this resilient family over time. What are those critical functions, tasks, skills, and events that we can look to with pride? Because that's also present.
Yep.
So it's not, you go to the doctor for wellness, not just because there's something wrong.
Hopefully you do that. Hopefully.
So the other framework that we often use is something that comes about resilient families from Froma Walsh, who is a PhD from the University of Chicago, who's done a lot of really beautiful work on resilient families. And she has a model that talks about, these pieces, the belief systems that are present in a resilient family, the organizational resources that are present in a resilient family, and then the communication processes. So depending on what kind of thinker you are or how you approach learning, sometimes it's nice to look at these things and then think, well, how does that look in my family?
Yep. Right.
It could become an aspirational goal, or it could be a skill that you want to learn, or you already have it and you want to remember, just because we have it already doesn't mean that we don't need to teach it to the next generation.
Yeah. Or highlight it, use it, etc. Okay. Well, this is great. Family Business on the Couch is dynamic. I do really like that one. I'm going to make sure that we have these written into the description kind of when we post this up. So, Ann, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank
Um,
you.
and as a native Iowan, thank you for giving back here. So greatly appreciate that. So
I'm very proud of my Iowa roots.
good, as you should be. So we really appreciate that. Again, you've been joining us on Never Go Against the Family, our family business podcast here at the UNI Family Business Center. And our guest has been Ann Smart. Ann, thank you so much for being with us today. Greatly appreciate it. And hopefully we can have you on again. So thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Take care.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Never Go Against the Family, a podcast produced by the University of Northern Iowa Family Business Center. You can find more information about the center, membership, and upcoming events at unifamilybusinesscenter.com. As Vito Corleone advises, never go against the family.